1. Another day, another dollar. James Cash is a very rich man. In fact, he's a multimillionaire. He is 35 years old and lives in a mansion in the country. He is the chairman of a big company. Every day he has breakfast in bed. He usually has boiled eggs and champagne. He makes phone calls and reads the newspapers at breakfast time. Then he gets dressed. His servants help him. He always wears a smart suit to the office. At 7 o'clock, his chauffeur drives him to his office. He has business meetings every morning. Every afternoon he looks at the sales reports. Sales go up every year because business is good. In the evenings he likes to entertain important business clients. They often go to his favourite nightclub, Madame Jojo's. They have dinner, drink champagne, and watch a cabaret. At 2 o'clock in the morning, his chauffeur drives him home. He goes to bed half an hour later and dreams about sales figures. James is always exhausted. The next day is exactly the same. Would you want a job like his? Listen to the interview with James's personal assistant.
It's well known that Mr. Cash is one of the richest men in Britain. Does he work every day?
Well, he doesn't usually work on Sundays, except when he has business visitors, or a special meeting, or if he's on a business trip, or if the company is very busy, which actually is quite often, so...
So, in fact, he works 7 days most weeks?
Yes, I suppose so. But he has a holiday every year. He goes to his villa in the south of France.
And how long is his holiday?
Well, he goes for a month in August, but he usually comes back early. He says he gets bored.
Why do you think he works so hard?
He loves it. The company is his life. He doesn't have anything else. It's not for me, though. I'm leaving my job next month and going travelling. There's more to life than money.
2. Environmental disaster. Last night there was an accident in the South China Sea near the Philippines. An oil tanker hit a fishing boat. The collision happened in very stormy weather at 2:30 in the morning. The fishing boat sank, but the crew got into a life raft. The tanker didn't see the men in the life raft and didn't stop. There was a big hole in the bow of the oil tanker, and thousands of tons of oil came out and leaked into the sea. The fishermen sent up rockets and flares. A rescue boat saw them and rescued the fishermen. They gave them blankets and hot drinks, but they were still very cold and shocked. This morning, in daylight, a search helicopter saw all the oil on the sea. Special boats are spraying chemicals on the oil, but the beaches are already polluted. A lot of fish and seabirds are caught in the oil. It is a very bad day indeed for the fishing and tourism industries. Listen to the interview with a fisherman.
Peter, what was the first you knew of the danger?
I was downstairs in the cabin. I was cooking some fish for me and the others. Then I heard a terrible smashing noise. I didn't know what it was. Then the tanker was on top of us like a big grey mountain. The next thing I knew, we were all fighting for life in the cold water.
Was it very difficult to get into the life raft?
It was almost impossible. It was dark, the boat was sinking, and the sea was very rough. But we did it.
Were you surprised that the tanker didn't stop?
We sent up flares when we were in the life raft. I'm sure they saw them, but they didn't come back for us. They don't care about a few fishermen.
How are the rest of the crew feeling at the moment?
Well, we're all alive, and that's something. But the worst thing is that we've lost our boat. How can we catch fish without a boat? How will we live? It's absolutely terrible.
3. Gap year. Last June, after his school exams had finished, Francis bought a world traveller ticket and travelled around the world. First he flew from London to Australia. His first job was picking grapes. He also swam with sharks. something he'll never forget. His first stop in Europe was Greece, where he visited lots of old temples. Next he travelled to Italy, where he grew a beard and ate lots of pasta. While he was waiting for a train at Pisa station, a thief stole all his money. He had to sleep outside under the stars that night. He spent 3 weeks in India and took lots of photos. He travelled on to Tibet, where he climbed some very high mountains, including Mount Everest. It was very cold and snowy. A few months later, he went from Hong Kong to China by boat and was seasick. In China, he hired a bike and cycled to the Great Wall. And in Brazil, he went to Rio de Janeiro for Carnival Week, of course. He danced all night and fell in love for a week. This morning, 10 months later, he arrived home. His parents were very pleased to see him. Listen to the interview with a lifeguard.
Tell us about what happened last June.
Well, it's not the first time it's happened. Travellers, they think they can do what they want. They don't think about anyone else. That afternoon, there were very big waves, but the silly idiot was swimming.
Maybe he didn't know it was dangerous.
There were danger signs everywhere. My colleague was watching him through binoculars, and then he saw a shark very near the swimmer.
What do you do in that situation?
You set off an alarm, and then you try to get to the swimmer as quickly as possible. 2 of us had to pull the boy out of the sea.
Is it really dangerous?
Dangerous? Of course it's dangerous. Sharks kill several people every year.
And what do you say to the people you rescue?
Well, we're not polite. People who go swimming where there are danger signs are idiots. They should be more responsible. They're not children and we're not their parents.
4. UFO story. Joe Green is a postman. He lives a very ordinary life. He works all day and meets his friends in the pub in the evening. But one summer's evening last year, something very strange happened. He was on his way home when he saw an unidentified flying object, or UFO, in the sky. Joe got out of his van and watched it. It landed in a field near his home. The UFO was glowing and the whole field was lit up. Joe was very curious. Were there aliens inside? He walked towards the UFO and climbed in. Then it took off. Joe didn't know what to do. He couldn't see any aliens. He looked at the control panels in the flight deck and pushed some buttons. The UFO flew into outer space and orbited the Earth. Then it landed right back in the same field. Joe went home and told his wife the amazing story. She didn't believe him. He decided to go to the police station and told the policeman on duty there. He didn't believe him either. Finally, Joe went to the pub and told his friends. They laughed at him. Aliens? A UFO? A trip into outer space? Joe didn't care. He knew what happened. Now he goes to the same field every night and waits for the UFO to reappear. Suddenly, his life doesn't seem quite so ordinary. Listen to the interview with Joe's wife.
Some people say that your husband is a little bit crazy. Do you agree?
Absolutely. He was such an ordinary, sensible man before all of this UFO nonsense. Now I never see him in the evenings. He goes out every night and spends hours looking up at the sky. He says he's waiting for the UFO to come back.
Do you think the UFO will come back?
What UFO? It's rubbish. They don't exist. You know what I think happened on that night? I think he fell asleep in the van on the way home. He dreamt the whole thing. Just a stupid dream. Husbands.
5. Football crazy. It was Saturday, and Saturday meant football. Jim and his dad decided to go to a match. It was between Liverpool and Munich. "Can't you do something different for once?" Jim's mum asked. She hated football. They got to the stadium at 10 to 3 and found their seats. The players came onto the pitch and the game started at 3. It was very exciting. After 25 minutes, Liverpool scored a goal and the crowd cheered. In the second half, there was a foul by a Liverpool defender and the referee gave a penalty to Munich. The Liverpool goalkeeper saved the penalty. The Munich players and supporters were very disappointed. Liverpool won the game 1-0. Jim and his dad were really happy. Their team had won. They got home at 6:30. Jim's mum was in the kitchen. "We won, Mum. It was amazing," Jim said. "What's for dinner?" "Tomato soup. You know I don't like cooking on a Saturday." Jim and his dad didn't care. They put their supper on a tray and went into the sitting room. The day wasn't over. They put on the TV and watched the match highlights. Jim's mum was really annoyed. Listen to the interview with a Munich fan.
Can I ask you about the game?
It was terrible. I spent a lot of money on the airfare and the ticket and for a hotel, and the game was a disaster.
Why do you think Munich lost?
The referee was blind. He made a lot of bad decisions.
But Liverpool played well, didn't they? And Munich missed a penalty.
Liverpool played quite well, but Munich were better. The missed penalty was a terrible mistake by our striker.
What are you going to do now?
Well, we're in Liverpool, so we're going to have a few beers and then we're going to some clubs. It's great for music here. And tomorrow morning, we're getting the plane home.
Well, have a good evening and enjoy the rest of your time in Liverpool.
6. Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa was born in 1910 in Macedonia and grew up in a small town called Skopje. She became a nun. She wanted to work with very poor people in India. She arrived in India in 1929. She went to live in Calcutta and started an organization of nuns called the Sisters of Charity to help the poor and homeless and the dying. The sisters run clinics and provide shelters on the pavements of the city. Every day, the sisters walk through the crowded streets and bring back people who are ill or nearly dead. They also help children, especially orphans. In 1979, Mother Teresa got the Nobel Prize for Peace. She accepted it in the name of the sick and homeless people of the world. She died in 1997, but her name lives on. Today, the Sisters of Charity continue to help poor people all over the world. Listen to the interview with a charity worker.
Firstly, can you tell me about your organisation?
Yes, we're a fairly small charity, and we help people in developing countries, especially Africa and India. Our most important job is sending planes with doctors to remote areas.
Planes?
Yes, you see, in some places there are no roads. If people are sick, they often die because they can't get medical help.
And what's your job in the organisation?
I'm in charge of fundraising. I have to get money for the charity. And of course we need a lot of money because planes and medical supplies are very expensive.
How do you get the money?
We organise dinners and parties and we raise money from the tickets. A lot of our money comes from private donations. We put adverts in the papers so people know who we are and what we do.
Are you paid for your work?
Yes, I'm a full-time paid employee, but there are lots of people in my team who are volunteers. They give their free time because they know how important this work is. We save lives every day.
7. Dinner disaster. Mr. and Mrs. Smith both loved cooking. Mr. Smith also wanted a better job in his company. They decided it was time for a dinner party. Mr. Smith phoned his new boss, Mr. Plummer, and invited him and his wife to dinner on Friday night. On Friday afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Smith spent a long time cooking a delicious dinner. They prepared fresh salmon filled with prawns and chili. They laid the table with silver candles and bottles of wine. Then they got ready. Mrs. Smith put on a black evening dress, and Mr. Smith wore his best suit. Everything was perfect. The plumbers arrived on time at 8 o'clock. "Let's have a drink," said Mr. Smith. They all went into the dining room. Then they saw the table and they were horrified. The main plate was empty. The salmon had gone. Mrs. Smith burst into tears. "Don't worry, love, we can still have fish." And Mr. Smith rushed out of the house. He ran to the fish and chip shop down the road and bought 4 portions of fish and chips, the great British takeaway. And they all had a lovely evening. So did their pet cat. Listen to the interview with Mr. and Mrs. Plummer. Have you ever been to the Smiths before?
No, last Friday was the first time.
Why was the evening unusual?
Well, we arrived on time, said hello, and a few minutes later our hostess was in tears.
I felt so sorry for them. George is Dave Smith's boss, so it was very embarrassing for them. When we went into the dining room, the table looked beautiful, but there was no dinner. Just a very happy cat.
Yes, poor things. But Dave reacted very quickly. Just 10 minutes later, we were all enjoying fish and chips.
Do you have any cats?
We don't have a cat, but we do have a very old dog. And a long time ago, something similar happened to us. The dog ate our Sunday lunch.
Anyway, it was a good evening, and we've invited Dave and Isabel to dinner with us in a few weeks' time. And I'll make sure our dog is somewhere safely out of the way.
8. Fashion fads. You can see from the pictures that fashions change a lot. In the Victorian times, clothes were more formal than they are now. Men wore heavy jackets and trousers with neat creases. Ladies wore dresses with very full skirts. Their sportswear was very similar to ordinary clothes, but men wore striped jackets and caps for tennis, and women wore long dresses and hats. In the 1920s, clothes were much looser. The flappers, as they were called, wore expensive clothes, and the women often wore long necklaces. During the wartime, of course, lots of people wore uniforms. By the 1960s, many women wore miniskirts. Men's clothing became more colourful and unusual. Everyone's clothes were more casual. 10 years later, clothes for men and women were similar. This style was called unisex, and it was the age of blue jeans. Nowadays, young people often wear either fleeces with hoods or baseball caps, and you see a lot of body piercings or tattoos. In the last 100 years, Western-style clothes have become common all over the world. Listen to the interview with a supermodel.
Hi, Stephanie. Your picture is on the front of lots of magazines around the world. Is that what you like most about the job?
Yes, I love the publicity. And the money, of course. It's great to be a celebrity.
But one article recently said you were too skinny, and you are setting a bad example to young girls. It says young girls are starving themselves to look like you. Some are becoming anorexic.
That's nonsense. Absolute rubbish. What a stupid idea. I'm not too thin. To be a fashion model, you have to be slim. You have to look good in the clothes. It's part of the job.
And do you usually wear the designer clothes that you model?
When I'm working, I do. But when I'm at home relaxing, I usually wear casual clothes, like t-shirts and shorts or jeans.
Now, what about your love life? We hear you are seeing a lot of the rock star Mike Strum. Is that true? Is it serious?
It's very difficult to keep my private life private. Oh, you journalists are always trying to get hot stories, aren't you? Yes, Mike and I are seeing each other. But that's all I'm saying at the moment. Sorry, my agent is calling me. I have to go. The helicopter is on its way to take me to a fashion shoot.
9. High Noon. High Noon is a very popular TV program. Lots of people watch it every week. It's about outlaws in the Wild West. Killer Clint is a dangerous gunfighter. He has a big black moustache and always carries 2 guns. He looks mean and aggressive. In today's program, he has just got off the train at Desertville. Everyone is frightened. even the sheriff and his deputy. The people of the town are running away. Now Killer Clint is kicking open the door of the saloon bar. He's drinking whiskey at the bar. Now it is 12 o'clock, high noon. Killer Clint is on his way to the sheriff's office. The sheriff and his deputy are hiding. They're terrified. Oh no! That's the end of today's program. What do you think will happen next? Will there be a shootout? Don't forget to watch next week's exciting episode. Listen to the interview with the sheriff.
How did you feel when you heard Clint was in town?
Well, everybody was obviously very frightened. I tried to keep everyone calm.
Really? Why was he in Desertville that afternoon?
Last month I arrested his cousin Hank and put him in prison. He was in a fight in the saloon. When I saw Hank in the fight, I knew it was his fault.
Why is that?
That whole family is trouble.
So what happened when Clint came into your office?
He said, "Let my cousin go now. I'll shoot your deputy if you don't." I had to let Hank go, but we'll arrest him again. 10. Fitness forever. Tony looked at himself in the mirror. He was very overweight with a big stomach. He had a look at his Keep Fit book and decided to take some exercise and go jogging. He put on his shorts and running vest and started to run along the road. Some boys laughed at him because he was running so slowly. Two ladies were talking on the pavement. One of them had a dog. Tony tripped over the dog's lead. While he was getting up, the dog bit him. Its owner got very angry with Tony. While he was limping home, it started to rain and he got very wet. He stood in his room feeling miserable. He was cold and wet and he had backache. He had a cut on his knee and a bite on his arm. He decided that exercise was too dangerous and threw his Keep Fit book in the wastepaper bin. Listen to the interview with a fitness fanatic.
I'm in the Mega Fitness Centre to meet a very regular user, Bella Bouncy. Bella, it's 8 o'clock in the morning. What time did you get here?
I get here at 6 every morning, as soon as it's open. I'm always the first.
You mean you get up before 6 every day to come to the fitness centre?
Oh, yes. I get up at about 5 because I like to run to the centre. That's about 10 kilometres.
And what do you do when you get here?
I have a programme of exercises. I use the cycles and the rowing machines. Then I do some weight training. And then I go to the pool and swim 40 lengths.
But why do you do so much exercise?
Well, it gives me a good appetite for breakfast. No, seriously. I was very ill 3 years ago. I had to start exercising when I left hospital to build up my strength. Now it's part of my life. You could say I'm a fitness fanatic. Excuse me now. I'm going for a swim and then I'm going to cycle to work. I'll be back here again at 6 o'clock for my jazz dance class and then aerobics. Bye!
Bye, Bella. Phew, I'm exhausted just talking to her. I'm going home to lie down.
11. Bank robbers on camera. Here is a news bulletin. The bank robbers who stole £5 million from Citibank last month are now under arrest. The 3 masked men terrified customers and staff at the bank when they forced cashiers to hand over money at gunpoint. Fortunately, the raid was filmed by a security camera. The police investigating the robbery took statements from witnesses. They were able to give good descriptions of the gunmen. Detectives also found fingerprints at the scene of the crime. The police were easily able to identify the criminals from the film, the descriptions given by witnesses, and the fingerprints. An informer telephoned the police and told them that the robbers were in the Bahamas. The police found them with their girlfriends by the pool of a villa. They arrested them and took them to the local police station at gunpoint. They will be sent back to this country soon and will probably go to prison for a long time. There is no information yet about the £5 million. Listen to the interview with one of the robbers' girlfriends.
Nigella, You were at the villa when the police arrested Shotgun Sid. How long have you known him?
Just for a couple of weeks. We met in a nightclub on a Greek island. He seemed a nice guy. He had lots of money. We had a good time together, and he invited me for a holiday at his villa. It seemed like a good idea at the time.
Did you know he was a bank robber?
Of course not. He told me he was a very successful dentist in London.
And what about the others?
He said that one was a doctor, and the other was a retired chief of police.
And did you really believe him?
Certainly. Why would he lie to me?
But didn't you read about the robbery in the papers or see the pictures on TV?
I don't read newspapers very much. I'm more interested in clubbing.
12. Carry on camping. The Thompsons, Lucy and Alex and their parents, packed everything for a camping holiday. This was the first time they had been camping, and it was not easy to get everything in the car. There were a lot of arguments. On the journey, the traffic was very bad, and they were stuck in a traffic jam. There were more family arguments. They were getting hot and bored. Then they ran out of petrol about half a kilometre from the campsite, so they pushed the car the rest of the way. They decided to eat their picnic, but there was no picnic. Alex ate all the food while the others unpacked the car. How greedy! Mr. and Mrs. Thompson and Lucy were very angry with Alex. Alex decided to go fishing and fell in the lake. His mother was very angry again. After that, a bull chased Mr. Thompson, and Mr. Thompson tore his trousers on a fence. This was not a good start to their first camping holiday. In the night, there was a storm. It rained very hard. Mrs. Thompson said, "Enough is enough," and decided to go home. She quietly took a bag and drove off, leaving everyone else behind. The tent collapsed in the night. Mr. Thompson slept in a tree. What would they do now? Listen to the interview with Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. I understand that you had a terrible holiday. What was the worst thing about it?
The bull was scary. The night in the tree was terrible. But the worst thing was finding that my wife and the car weren't there in the morning.
Oh, come on! It was your idea to go camping. I knew it would be a disaster. I wanted to go to a hotel in Spain.
And what was the worst thing for you?
When I came back for them the next day, everything was soaking wet and muddy. It took me 3 days to get everything clean again.
So why did you go camping?
I remember when I was a boy. We went camping every year, and it was always good fun. We were unlucky this time, but I'm sure it will be better next year.
I don't believe you just said that. I'm certainly not going to go camping again, ever. Next year, it'll be a hotel in Spain, and probably I'll go on my own.
13. Earthquake hits city. 2 years ago, a terrible earthquake hit the town of Canaz. At 3 a.m, the earth began to shake, great gaps appeared in the roads, and buildings collapsed. Many people were trapped in the ruins. Fires broke out and swept through the town. Rescuers searched for survivors and pulled them to safety. A news broadcast told the world of the disaster. Approximately 1,000 people had died, and 10,000 had been made homeless. Emergency aid, including tents, blankets and medicine, poured in from around the world, but Canaz is extremely remote, and the trip from the nearest airport took 2 to 3 days. There were numerous charity appeals and events to raise money to help the victims of the disaster. Soon after, news broke of a dreadful scandal. Crooks had stolen a large amount of the aid and were selling it on the black market. After some time, it was possible to airlift bulldozers to the site and begin clearing away the rubble. Rebuilding has now begun, and there are some new buildings in the city. However, many of the earthquake victims are still living in tents in the nearby hills. Already, the outside world has begun to forget about the Canaz tragedy. Listen to the interview with a local businessman.
Is it true that hundreds of people have made money from selling aid to Canaz on the black market?
Some medicine and so on has been sold to the public unofficially, that's true.
It's estimated that only 25% of the aid given to the victims reached the disaster area. Isn't that a disgraceful scandal?
I think those figures are exaggerated. Probably that aid was never sent to Canaz in the first place.
Were you involved in the black market sales of relief aid for Canaz?
Certainly not. But in a country like this, everyone has to look after their own family first. You have to make money any way you can.
14. Treasure restored. About the year 300 BC, an expert Athenian potter made a beautiful vase. It was used for carrying water or wine in the house of a wealthy nobleman. Time passed and the vase was lost. About 2,000 years later, it was discovered by workers who were harvesting grapes in a vineyard. Miraculously, the vase was undamaged, and it was eagerly bought by a merchant for a very low price. The merchant took it away with him on his ship, as he thought he could sell it for a lot of money. Unfortunately, during the sea voyage there was a very bad storm, and the ship was wrecked. The vase, together with the rest of the ship's contents, sank to the bottom of the sea. Last year it was found badly damaged and covered in seaweed by a team of divers exploring the wreck. An expert restorer has painstakingly pieced the fragments together, and the distinctive design is almost as good as new. There was a lot of interest in the vase at an auction 2 months ago, and many people bid for it. The vase was finally purchased for £150,000. It is now on display in the Greek Pottery Gallery of the Metropolitan Museum of New York. Listen to the interview with a young visitor to the gallery.
What do you think of the Greek pottery exhibition?
It's really boring. Hundreds of old pots. They're all the same.
Did you know that the museum has just paid £150,000 for this vase?
That's incredible. I bought my mother a vase for her birthday. She puts flowers in it. It cost £5.
But this one is more than 2,000 years old.
That's what makes it even more ridiculous. The vase I bought was brand new, and the colours are much nicer. Excuse me, I want to get to a more interesting bit of the museum. The Egyptian mummies are much more fun.
15. A Week in Paradise. Tom and Judy got married 2 weeks ago. Before they got married, they spent a long time choosing where to have a perfect honeymoon. They chose Paradise Island because they wanted a luxury hotel, the opportunity for sunbathing on superb beaches, swimming in the clear blue water, and plenty of lively nightlife to enjoy. Their wedding day was wonderful, and they were looking forward to their holiday. They set off early the next day, but unfortunately their plane was delayed. They weren't too worried because they thought Paradise Island would be wonderful. When they arrived on Paradise Island, they were disappointed to find that the weather was cold and rainy. To make matters worse, the hotel was still under construction, and the facilities were far from luxurious. They couldn't see the sea from their room, but instead the view was dominated by ugly factories. When they went down to the beach, they found that it was dirty and that the sea was polluted. They decided to go inland to do some sightseeing instead of spending time on the beach. They were having a good day, and Tom posed on a wall while Judy took his picture. Unfortunately, he slipped off, fell badly and broke his leg. He had to go to hospital and his leg was put in plaster. They weren't able to go dancing at all, and Judy spent most of the time writing postcards while Tom gloomily read magazines. Now they are back home again, after some more flight delays, and Tom is on his way to the travel agents to complain and to try and get some money back. Listen to the interview with the travel agent.
Do you have many complaints about your holidays?
Certainly not. We check out our hotels and tour operators very carefully.
But obviously in the Tom and Judy case, things went badly wrong.
Well, they had some bad luck, certainly. But we advise all holiday makers to take out insurance. We can't be responsible for people doing silly or dangerous things.
And what about the hotel and the flight delays?
Paradise Island is a very popular resort, and of course there is development all the time. Flights do get delayed at peak times. That's one of the risks of travel.
Are you going to give Tom and Judy any compensation?
No, we don't take any responsibility for what happened.
16. Olympic success story. Lisa used to race her friends to and from school every day. And when she was 15 years old, she became the national junior athletics champion. She trained very hard every day and was thrilled to gain a place in the team for the Olympics. Then, the day before her race, she had a bad accident. She was hit by a motorcyclist and injured her arm. Most people thought that she would not be able to run, but despite the pain, she ran in the 5,000 meters. In a close finish, she won the silver medal. She received a tremendous welcome when she returned home. Cheering crowds lined the streets, and the president gave a grand reception in her honor. Now she is a coach at the National Stadium, but she is also a very popular public figure and makes a lot of money from appearing in advertisements. Lisa is very ambitious and is thinking of becoming a politician. Perhaps one day she will even be president of her country. Listen to the interview with the motorcyclist.
You have seriously injured one of the young stars of the Olympics. How did the accident happen?
I was riding through the city centre, quite slowly, when a group of partygoers came out of a hotel. This girl stepped off the pavement without looking. I couldn't avoid her. I'm very sorry about her arm, but there's a lot of damage to my motorbike too. Who's going to pay for that?
Have you seen Lisa since the accident?
No. I tried to visit her at the athletes' village, but the security people wouldn't let me in. I have sent her some flowers, though, and an invitation to dinner, and I hope she does well in the race.
17. Lottery win. Vera and Jack were childhood sweethearts who worked as waitress and cook in the Sunset Cafe. Things changed overnight when Vera won a prize of £1.25 million on the lottery. She got a lot of attention from the press and received hundreds of begging letters from people asking her to help them solve their money problems. She started going to sophisticated cocktail parties and fell for a smooth-talking lady killer. He was extremely handsome and seemed to be very wealthy. He flirted with her and flattered her. She felt fantastic. She spent a fortune on designer clothes, beauty treatments, and on presents for this man. However, when her new lover left her, she was heartbroken. She started to drink more and more alcohol and take antidepressants. Her so-called friends stopped seeing her. She had nobody. Eventually, she went back to see Jack. He was delighted to make a fresh start. With the remains of her lottery win, Vera bought the cafe and had it decorated and upgraded. Now they are working together again and share an ambition to make a big success of the winning ticket restaurant. Listen to the interview with Jack.
Jack, how did Vera change when she won all that money?
She was just overwhelmed by all the publicity and the letters. She couldn't cope with it. She got in with the wrong sort of people and started to spend.
And how did you feel about that?
It was awful. I knew she was going to be hurt, but she cut me out of her life. I didn't see her for ages and there was nothing I could do. That was the worst thing.
And how is she now?
Well, as you know, she got terribly depressed. But thank goodness she saw sense before it was too late. She's off the pills and things are fine again now.
18. Solo career. The pop group Volcano had a meteoric rise to fame with a string of big hits including the smash hit Fire for You. That is the song they will always be famous for. Following that hit, their wildly energetic stage show was a sellout on their world tour. They performed in cities from New York to Sydney. They were mobbed by screaming fans after each concert and were totally exhausted and stressed out by the end of that tour. Jake became increasingly dependent on antidepressants and other drugs. A violent public argument between Belle and Mike attracted a lot of publicity, and soon afterwards the group split up. Tragedy struck a few days later when Jake was found drowned in the swimming pool of his mansion after a party. Desi and Belle went in search of peace and are now living in a remote cottage. They are guarding their privacy and refusing to give interviews. Mike, on the other hand, has begun a new successful career as a solo artist. His new ballad, Time Present, has gone straight into the charts at #1, as the young fans still idolize him. Listen to the interview with Mike.
What do you feel now as you look back at your time with Volcano?
A lot of sadness. We were too young to handle so much pressure, and we paid, well, Jake paid a terrible price. Nothing can make up for that.
Desi and Belle have chosen a very different lifestyle. Do you still see much of them?
They don't see much of anyone. I've spoken to Desi on the phone a couple of times, but Belle and I hurt each other pretty badly, and I think it'll be a long time before we get together again.
And your new career? Congratulations on Time Present making #1.
Thanks. I'm writing music to appeal to a more mature audience these days, so I'm delighted with the response to Time Present.
19. Endangered species. Since the wars of the 1970s, the number of well-armed poachers in Africa has increased, and so has the problem of endangered animals. Elephants and rhinos are amongst the most endangered. Poachers shoot elephants and rhinos with automatic weapons, cut off the tusks or horns, and leave the bodies to rot. Killing these rare animals, except under certain controlled circumstances, is illegal. Making and selling things from ivory is also illegal, but the trade continues. Game wardens try to protect the herds of animals and catch the poachers before they harm the animals. But this is difficult and can be very dangerous. Over 100,000 elephants have been killed in Zambia, Central African Republic and Uganda in the past 20 years, and there are very few rhinos left in the wild. These remarkable animals are being slaughtered for their horn, which is regarded as having special powers in traditional Chinese medicine. In addition to conservation issues, it is in the economic interests of African countries to protect these species because they attract huge income through the tourist industry. We know about other endangered species such as gorillas, tigers and whales, but in some European countries, hunters shoot millions of small birds a year for sport. Surely their attitude is even worse than the rhino poachers, who at least have the excuse that they need money. Listen to the interview with a conservationist.
There must be about 20 baby elephants here. How do they come to you?
Game wardens from the national parks get in touch if they find orphaned elephants. Usually, babies stay very close to the bodies of their parents if the adults have been shot for ivory. They're in great distress, of course, and the young ones can't survive very long in the bush without the protection of adults. They are often sick or starving or injured, and sometimes wounded by bullets. We work with the wardens to arrange transport to get them here as quickly as possible.
And how do you settle them in?
Each baby elephant has its own foster parent, a keeper who stays with it 24/7, certainly for the first week or so. It's very touching to see the way the relationship develops.
Do these elephants ever go back to the wild?
Yes, always. That's the aim of the scheme. Once they're older, they will meet wild elephants, and the natural instincts for bonding with the herd will take over.
And I see you have one baby rhino here. What's his story?
He's a she, actually. Her mother was killed by poachers for her horn. We hope that she will go back to the wild one day, but it's more difficult. There aren't many rhino, and we have to be very careful. This youngster is growing up here with the baby elephants as companions. She regards them as friends. Of course, the situation would be very different in the national park. A herd of wild elephant would attack and probably kill a rhino if it got too close. So it will take a lot of planning to reintroduce this rhino to her natural environment.
20. The end of smallpox. Medical science has conquered smallpox. This terrible disease, which through history has killed millions of people, has now been eradicated. The breakthrough came in 1796 when a British doctor called Edward Jenner discovered the smallpox vaccine. He injected patients with a vaccine which gave them a slight but not very serious form of the disease and enabled their bodies to build up resistance. At first, his discovery was treated with suspicion, but gradually other countries adopted the technique, and by 1900 there was almost no smallpox in Europe or North America, but outbreaks of the disease continued in South America, Asia and Africa. They were of epidemic proportions. In 1965, the World Health Organization began a vaccination campaign to eradicate smallpox. Teams of doctors have vaccinated millions of people even in remote areas. The last outbreak was in Africa in 1976. However, in case of emergency, huge stores of vaccine are kept in Geneva and New Delhi. But we are still at risk from killer diseases such as the SARS epidemic, which began in China, or malaria, which in some areas kills thousands of children every day. And of course, large parts of the world are still being devastated by the pandemic AIDS. Medicines are available to help control this disease, but for financial reasons, these treatments are mainly available only in developed countries. Listen to the interview with a doctor in Africa.
First of all, can I ask you what gives you most satisfaction about your job?
Easy. As a doctor here, you can really see that you're making a difference to people's lives. 50 years ago, polio, for example, was a major killer. Even when I started, it was very common in this part of the world. Now, because of the village vaccination program, it has almost disappeared completely. Also, I have to be honest, another thing that appeals to me about this work is the sense of adventure. We come by Land Rover, or a very small plane, to remote places that hardly anyone has visited. For a few days, it's possible to be the honoured guest in a community where the way of life hasn't changed for centuries. It's possible to experience the traditional tribal way of life. That's a real privilege, and it probably won't last for very much longer.
And is there anything you don't like?
Mosquitoes. But more seriously, a lot of our work now is with AIDS sufferers. We have vaccines which will delay the onset of the disease, but very often by the time we see people, it's too late to help. The scale of the problem is devastating. Some villages have lost a whole generation. That's heartbreaking.
21. Taking water to the desert. Prince Faisal, a wealthy and powerful politician and businessman, had an imaginative idea for bringing water to the unproductive desert areas of his country. He signed a £100 million contract with a consortium of investors and engineers in Paris to find a suitable iceberg and tow it to the Middle East. A satellite was used to survey Antarctica, and it was decided that the biggest iceberg in the world, measuring 40 by 35 kilometres, and containing 100 million cubic metres of fresh water, would be suitable. The iceberg was tested to make sure it would not crack during the long journey, and then it was shaped to make it more streamlined and easier to tow. To do this, holes were drilled into the surface of the iceberg, and then explosives were used to blast it into shape. Massive steel ropes were attached to the surface of the iceberg, and a fleet of powerful tugs began to tow it on the 8,000-kilometre journey to its destination. During the course of the 8-month journey, the iceberg lost 20% of its bulk. On arrival at its destination, it was sliced into huge blocks. The blocks were then towed much nearer the shore, and the process of melting the ice and pumping the water ashore through a pipeline could begin. From there, the fresh water was distributed around the region by pipelines and used to irrigate fields. Now, to the delight of Prince Faisal, there is new life in the desert, a rich harvest of different crops, and jobs in a new agricultural industry. Listen to the interview with a geologist.
Clearly, the supply of fresh water is now, and will increasingly be, a major international issue. You've seen the reports of Prince Faisal's project. What's your opinion of it?
Rather mixed, actually. Of course, it's a wonderful thing to irrigate the desert and produce crops, but on balance, I think that this idea has more disadvantages than advantages.
Could you be a bit more specific?
Well, everyone is concerned with global warming, aren't they? One of the damaging effects of global warming is that the ice cap will melt, sea levels will rise, and large areas of the world will be flooded. So it seems to me that anything that damages the ice cap, and blasting icebergs could do that, is a dangerous strategy.
But these icebergs have already broken away from the ice cap. The blasting is just to shape them for easier towing. All the water that would have melted and raised the sea level is now being used on land.
Yes, you're right, I suppose, but there are alternatives. We have to cut down on the amount of water we waste, get better at storing and distributing rainwater, improve desalination techniques to turn salty water into fresh, and be very active in discovering new underground sources.
So you are actually very much against using icebergs?
It may be necessary one day, but for now, we should leave the polar regions alone.
22. Microchip Revolution. In less than one generation, the miniature microchip, which is the size of a matchstick head, has changed life for all of us. Back in the 1960s, computers were very large and extremely expensive. Since then, thanks to the rapid advances in design and miniaturization of microchip technology, computers have become compact, affordable, and very powerful. A neat, lightweight laptop today does a far larger job than a massive mainframe of the 60s, but at a fraction of the price. Microchips are also an integral part of so many everyday items like watches, calculators, and phones, as well as sophisticated equipment like scanners used in hospitals or navigation instruments for aircraft. Microchips are essential for industry, which now relies heavily on robotics for assembly work in factories. They are extremely common in schools and are used for all kinds of educational purposes. In the home, computers provide the normal method of communication through email, of getting information fast from the internet, and doing the shopping. Mobile phones now combine the functions of camera, music recording device, alarm clock, diary and address book with independent personal communication. A small computer, really. Has this revolution been entirely beneficial? Computers have replaced work previously done by people. The benefits have not been used to put an end to poverty and disease. Perhaps a new generation is growing up addicted to an electronic virtual world. What is your opinion of the microchip revolution? Listen to the interview with a commuter.
Mr. Ludd, you've written to the paper saying you want a ban on using electronic devices on trains. That seems very extreme. Why are you so upset?
I travel to work by train every day, and I hate listening to other people's phone conversations. When you only hear one half of a conversation, you can't help trying to guess the rest, and it's impossible not to be distracted.
Perhaps you could buy a pair of earplugs, or listen to music during the journey?
That's another thing I hate. All these people with headsets. They're never properly adjusted. You can always hear the thump, thump, thump of the beat. It drives me up the wall.
And yourself, what do you like to do on a train journey?
I like to snooze or read a book. But these days that's impossible, because the person next to me is always taking my space with their laptop or having very loud conversations explaining to someone that they are on a train. I wish these wretched things had never been invented.
Do you have any good things to say about the microchip revolution?
Of course I do. I'm not a reactionary. I use computers all the time in my work. But for me, mobile phones in public places are as much of a nuisance as smoking. And we've banned that in most places now, haven't we?
23. Iceland and Cuba. Today we're looking at Iceland, which is situated very far north, almost on the Arctic Circle, and Cuba, which is on the Tropic of Cancer and lies between North and South America. The islands are roughly the same size in square kilometres, with Cuba much longer and narrower. Iceland has a population of less than 1/3 people, whereas Cuba is more densely populated, having over 11 million inhabitants. Of the two, Iceland has a much higher income per head. As you would expect from its location, Cuba is hot all the year round, with temperatures varying from about 25 to 35 degrees. It is also rainy, especially from May to November. This contrasts with the climate of Iceland. Temperatures there reach about 15 degrees in midsummer, July and August, but are at or below zero for the winter months. The politics of the two countries are very different. Fidel Castro came to power in Cuba in 1953 and turned Cuba into a Marxist state with himself in control. Iceland is a democratic republic. Economically, both countries have good natural resources. Sugarcane and tobacco are major crops in Cuba. Cuban rum and Havana cigars are world famous. Tourism is now an important industry. In Iceland, visitors come to see the spectacular geysers, but fishing remains the traditional industry. Listen to the interview with an ambassador from an EU country.
Good morning, Ambassador. First of all, could you tell me the area of your country?
It's just over 300,000 square kilometers. Not as big as France or Germany, for instance, but considerably bigger than the UK.
Economically, how strong is it?
We are in the Eurozone. There's quite a difference between the North and the South. In general, it has one of the stronger economies, certainly stronger than any of the EU countries like Slovenia or Latvia.
What's the population?
About 58 million. That's about the same as the UK.
And the main exports?
The North is industrial and the South mainly agricultural. Not many people know that we are Europe's largest producer of wine.
Could you tell me something about the geography of the country?
Of course. We have a very long coastline and a mountain range running almost the entire length of the country, so that is a big attraction for the millions of visitors. But I suppose that most of the tourists come to enjoy the atmosphere of the wonderful Renaissance cities like Florence and to enjoy the best food in the world.
24. Escape from war-torn country. Today has been a landmark day in Michael's life. He has graduated from college. People leave their homes and go to different countries for a number of reasons. Often they are economic migrants, looking for a better standard of living. In Michael's case, the reason was more traumatic. 10 years ago, his family was forced out of their war-torn village. Michael and his wife and young child walked 300 kilometers to the coast to escape the fighting. And in desperation, they tried to reach safety by crossing the sea in a small boat. They nearly died of exposure, but were rescued by a passing cargo ship. When they reached the nearest country, they were treated as stateless people because they had insufficient identity documents. After a long and worrying wait and a lot of investigation, they were given a visa for Canada. They arrived on a bitterly cold January day and spent the next few months in a tiny room, while Michael got a work permit and looked for a job. He worked hard at low-paid part-time jobs and at learning the language. Then he began to study at night for the qualifications to enroll for a college course. 10 years after the terrible events, which forced them to leave their home and country, Michael and his family are happily settled into a new life. Michael's story is fiction, but the situation is recognizable for thousands of people, and things do not always work out so well. There are many difficulties for migrants of all kinds, and for the countries which received them. Interview with a Vietnamese immigrant to Britain.
When did you arrive in Britain, and what were the circumstances of your arrival?
I was one of the so-called boat babies. My parents left Vietnam during the Vietnamese War. I was less than 2 years old at the time, and after a terrible journey by boat, they got to Britain in 1976.
So you don't have any memories of your country of birth?
That's correct in a way, but I grew up in a Vietnamese community in England, so my earliest memories are of very Vietnamese things: cooking, smells, language.
And you obviously started school in England?
Yes. By that time the family had moved from the original reception centre on the south coast to join relatives in the Midlands. My father was working in a textile factory. Mum was helping out in a restaurant and doing lots of part-time work to make ends meet.
Did you have any trouble learning English?
Well, pronunciation is difficult for Vietnamese speakers, but of course learning from an early age was a big advantage.
Did you start your electronics business straight after school?
Almost. I worked for an uncle who was doing something similar for a couple of years and then started up on my own. I think I was lucky to be in the right place at the right time.
Do you think of yourself as British or Vietnamese?
British. I hesitated a little because an important part of my life is my Vietnamese background and culture.
And have you ever been back to your country of birth?
I've thought about it, and I keep in touch with some distant relatives I've never seen. It would be possible now, but my life is here, and I'm happy to keep it like that.